At the beginning, I'm going to go through and talk about each rune and how good it is for Vladimir, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to show the rune pages that the challenger players are using for Vladimir. Vladimir's got a very diverse set of runes that he can use, and part of what makes him a very interesting champion. So let's start with the sorcery tree. And just before I say this, all of the ranks I have for the, I guess the tier list for all these runes are going to be in the description. It's going to be a little Imgur link. It'll have everything in there. Okay, so for sorcery, we have Summon Airy. Summon Airy is one of the best runes Vladimir can take as a keystone. It is definitely top tier. It gives you a lot of early poke and harass. It applies on your auto attacks. It applies on your abilities. It gives you the most pressure you can get out of any rune early on. Arcane Comet. Arcane Comet is kind of borderline. It does a lot of what Airy does. It's just it doesn't apply off of your auto attacks. It's not consistent because it can miss. Vladimir doesn't have very good ways to make sure you stay in the Comet before it hits you. So it's not very good. It's kind of borderline. You would never take this over Airy. Phase Rush. Phase Rush is actually quite good. Phase Rush is almost necessary. It's a situational rune, but it's almost necessary in certain matchups, like Nasus or a lot of bruisers where you'd like to disengage whenever they jump on you. But things like the Nasus Wither can be greatly reduced by the Phase Rush, and he'll never be able to get onto you. So it's a good rune, despite what a lot of people say. It's very good. People are using that in High Challenger as well. Nullifying Orb. Nullifying Orb is like a mini hex drinker for Vladimir. It helps against a lot of burst mages like LeBlanc or combo-oriented mages, or even just people with consistent damage, Syndra or Talia. They do have some burst elements, but also they have some consistent poke that they can whittle you away with. That Nullifying Orb can act as a miniature hex drinker, which can help you in those matchups, surviving burst as well as taking more all-ins against those kind of champions. It's a very good rune, very good rune. It's situational in that you'd only want to really take it into those kind of matchups against bursty champions. However, it's very good. Ultimate Hat is also situational. It's about equal with Nullifying Orb. It really depends. If you have to decide between these two runes, it really depends on whether you're in a matchup that can kill you with magic damage, like a LeBlanc or maybe a Syndra or Talia. Somebody who can kill you with magic damage, then you would want to take the Nullifying Orb. If you're in a matchup where they don't deal magic damage, or they don't have much kill pressure on you, or you feel confident that they're never going to kill you, you take Ultimate Hat in these situations, especially if you're taking Area and you get three sorcery runes. Ultimate Hat is the better choice in those situations. But these are both situational. You don't always pick these, especially if you are going up against maybe these, the row 2 and the row 3 in sorcery are excellent. Okay, so Transcendence. It's on to row 2. Transcendence is tier 1. It's top tier. 10% cooldown reduction is excellent. Vladimir loves cooldown reduction. It's more ultimates. It's more basic of abilities. It's just excellent. The only problem with Transcendence is that it doesn't kick in until level 10. So really that only becomes an issue when you compare it with the other options. Celerity, 3% movement speed throughout the entire game. That's going to be excellent in helping you get your empowered Qs off, gap closing or dodging abilities. It's just all around, just that movement speed is very useful throughout the entire game. As an added bonus, you get some ability power for each point of bonus movement speed you get, which will end up giving you, a little bit of AP throughout the game. Especially once you get boots and Shurelias, it really adds up to being a nice little chunk of damage that you get. Normally, you'll see a lot of Vladimir players either take Celerity or Transcendence, and that's the decision you have to make there is, do I need the early game power with Celerity, or can I afford to wait in this matchup for some later game, for some mid-game power once I hit level 10 to get that cooldown reduction? Because Transcendence is going to be stronger than Celerity once you hit level 10. But before level 10, Celerity is going to be stronger than Transcendence. So you really have to look at the matchup and think, well, is this a matchup I need to win before level 10, or is this a matchup where the early game power is not going to matter very much? And that's how you're going to decide between those two runes. Absolute Focus is situational. Absolute Focus is generally only taken in a cheese build, like a build where you're trying to burst an enemy laner with surprise damage. Very popular amongst people who run Electrocute. But if you're not running the Electrocute build, trying to cheese out as much damage and solo kills from 100 to 0 kind of things, Absolute Focus is not going to be as good as Celerity or Transcendence, so that's why it's situational. It's a good rune, but it's standing next to two amazing runes. Okay, so the row 3 is also very excellent, and they're really... you have kind of a comparison between Celerity and Transcendence with Scorch and Gathering Storm. These are also two tier 1 like excellent runes, Scorch and Gathering Storm. So Scorch will give you more early pressure. It's a lot like Airy. It gives you a ton of early pressure. And this will help you get the early kills in the laning phase, as well as a little bit of extra damage always helps throughout the entire game. Gathering Storm doesn't kick in until 10 minutes, which is not a long time actually. So towards the end of laning phase, the Gathering Storm will kick in, give you 8 ability power, and after that happens, it's going to be better than Scorch. After 20 minutes, it's going to be excellent. 24 ability power is amazing. And so you really have to think in your matchup, does it really matter what's going on in the pre-10 minutes? If I'm laning against a tank on Vladimir, that Scorch damage isn't really going to matter, especially after the tank gets first back and he buys some magic resist or some health. The Scorch damage isn't really going to do much. Same with the Celerity, right? So against maybe a tank in the top lane, right, you would want to go these slower runes like Transcendence and Gathering Storm to, scale better and be more useful after the laning phase, because that's what you're shooting for. So that's sorcery. Excellent primary tree, excellent secondary tree. It's really, really good. Now moving on to domination, which is, say, the second best. So you have Electrocute. Electrocute is a good rune. It's very good top tier. It has burst damage that can help you get kills. That's really all it does. It doesn't provide you any utility at all. It's just for one-shotting people. And it's very good at that, and that's why it's a top tier rune on Vladimir. Vladimir's job is to kill people. Predator. This is also a top tier rune, and this rune is full of utility, not really full of damage. So that's really the comparison you got to make between these two keystones. Predator is a very useful rune because it'll help you Predator lane, it'll help you Predator onto your targets that you need to get onto, and it will help you roam. And these three things are what makes Predator top tier. Vladimir's biggest weakness is actually getting onto his targets. It's very difficult to get onto the people you're trying to kill without some kind of mobility from Flash or Ghost or Shirelia's, something like that. Now that Shirelia's is in the game, it's actually a lot easier to get onto people, so that's why Electrocute is pretty good right now. Dark Harvest is really borderline. It's not very good. It's hard to guarantee this damage because it only lasts for 20 seconds. It's only applied on an auto attack, and Vladimir doesn't really think about putting auto attacks in his combo. It's not hard to get an auto. It's just that oftentimes Dark Harvest is just not going to be as good as Electrocute, so you don't ever take it. Cheap Shot is actually very underrated, especially in patch 8.10, which is this patch. It got buffed, and Vladimir can apply this on his pool. He can apply this on his E. If you do a full charge E into a Q, that'll apply the Cheap Shot damage. So it's not bad. It does very well on Vladimir. It's a situational rune though. You would mostly go Cheap Shot if you're trying to cheese out more damage, like in this Electrocute. If you're using Electrocute and this Absolute Focus, you can throw in Cheap Shot and get some extra damage there. Taste of Blood. This is top tier rune, tier 1. The reason you run Taste of Blood is because it just gives you more early pressure. It gives you more early sustain. You get a little bit of healing every wave whenever you hit an enemy champion, and that really adds up to give you stronger early game. Doesn't scale very well, but the early game matters, especially in a lot of matchups. And Sudden Impact is another situational rune. It will apply on your flash and it'll apply on your proto belt. Those are the two main ways that Vladimir gets the Sudden Impact applied. And so you'd really only go this if you're, again, trying to cheese out some extra damage, squeezing out more damage out of Vladimir than he already has to get those earlier one-shots and all that. So if you're going proto belt with Electrocute, Sudden Impact is something to think about because you can use proto belt to activate your Sudden Impact and get some more damage. However, these two runes are often not picked over Taste of Blood because Taste of Blood's just very good overall. Not to say that they're bad runes. So on to row 2. Ghost Poro is pretty garbage, so I'm not really going to talk about that one. The sitting in a bush just isn't very good to get the little tiny ward that the enemy can see that you have. It's really bad. So mostly about Zombie Ward and Eyeball Collector. Most people will pick Eyeball Collector here, and that's because Eyeball Collector gives you ability power, and ability power is a stat that Vladimir scales very well with. It increases his healing, his health, his damage, and so most people will just not think a second thought and just pick Eyeball Collector because it scales really well and it gives you carrying potential. But Zombie Ward is also pretty good. Eyeball Collector is top tier, tier 1. Zombie Ward is tier 2. It's situational. When you think that you can... Or Zombie Ward's just a very solid rune overall, actually. You can get extended wards, which will allow you to play more aggressively or, get more vision control, which is a very powerful thing. And some people will take it over Eyeball Collector just because of how powerful vision is in the game. But most will choose Eyeball Collector. Now onto the row 3, these Hunter runes. They're all pretty good, except the Relentless Hunter is more uncommon, and it is actually pretty situational. So Ravenous Hunter is giving you extra sustain throughout the entire game. It'll be the only one of these runes that actually gives you some power early on, in that it'll give you a little bit more sustain. As well as, later in the game it'll give you a spell vamp that you really like. Top tier rune Ravenous Hunter, you really want this one most of the time. Ingenious Hunter, this is also a top tier rune, mostly because of how well it synergizes with all the item active effects, or activatable items, that Vladimir likes to build, like Shirelia's, or Protobelt, or Zonia's, or even his trinket wards are increased by this. So Ingenious Hunter is worth considering as well. If you think you don't need the sustain and you are going to be building item actives, Ingenious Hunter will be very good for you. Relentless Hunter, people actually take this, even though you might think it's not very useful. Vladimir's not really a roaming champion, but Relentless Hunter, the out-of-combat movement speed is very useful, regardless of how you're playing Vladimir. It's just a bit situational in that these two things very clearly give you an advantage, whereas the out-of-combat movement speed does not have as many use cases for Vladimir as maybe for other champions, but it is still a good rune, although it's a little situational. Now, moving on to Inspiration, which is, I guess, the third best tree you can get primary, I would say. Glacial Augment, it's pretty awful. Same with Dark Harvest. It's hard to guarantee auto attacks, and the effect isn't even that useful. Of course, you can build items with activatable slows, like Twin Shadows or Hextech GLP or Randuin's, but they're really not worth taking this keystone over something else, so this is kind of a garbage keystone. Kleptomancy, this really doesn't help Vladimir. It doesn't help you scale fast enough. It's kind of borderline. It's not very useful. So you don't really want to take this one. Unsealed Spellbook, this is top tier. Even after the changes, it's very good. Oftentimes people will end up just starting with Teleport or Ghost or something, and then using the Unsealed Spellbook to switch to a more aggressive summoner like Ignite, or maybe a Cleanse or a Barrier. It's a very strong rune, even though a lot of people dropped the rune after the rework. It is still very powerful, so it's worth considering. In part because of all of the really excellent runes you can get in Inspiration. And in the first row, Hextech Flash Traption is really kind of garbage. you don't really want to think about this one. It's actually has some use cases. I mean, you could use Hex Flash to try and when your empowered Q is about to recharge. The only reason I put it as borderline is because of this, is that you can technically, like, you know, bait or threaten the flash on them with the empowered Q if they come up for minions with the Hex Flash, but it's really not worth it giving up these two excellent runes right here. Magical Footwear, this is an excellent rune because most of the time this will give you your free boots right when you finish your Shurelya's, and so you'll have a lot of movement speed coming in and you won't have to pay for those boots. Magical Footwear is really amazing and most people will take this rune. Stopwatch, perfect timing, just got buffed this patch. It's amazing. 8-minute cooldown before you get a free stopwatch. This is very nice. It'll help you get your Zonias earlier. But also another powerful aspect of this is that it'll allow you to get early boots, where when you take magical footwear you're not allowed to build boots. So if you plan on really bullying the enemy with, you know, the empowered Qs and having the most movement speed you can to force those kind of trades, perfect timing is a really excellent choice there. It's top tier along with magical footwear. And that's really the playstyle choice you have to make whenever you pick between these two. Do you want the early boots? Yes, then go the stopwatch. If you don't care about the early boots and you just care about, you know, I'll just get my Shurelya's and then do that, right? Magical footwear is going to be better. Okay, on to row 2. So Futures Market and Biscuit Delivery, they're not nearly as good as Dematerializer. They're situational, but when you stand them up against Dematerializer, it's not going to be that great. So Dematerialize is amazing because, for one, it'll allow you to dematerialize Banner of Command minions, which is a decently popular strategy right now, to throw Banner of Command on a cannon minion against a mage like Vladimir who has trouble killing the minion. Well, if you have Dematerializer, you can just, you know, remove the minion from the game, which really saves you a lot of trouble. But not just that, it'll help you control the wave early on. If you just dematerialize a cannon every time it shows up, you'll get a pushing power against champions you don't normally get pushing power against on Vladimir, which can help you get those roams off, or just go in for deep vision, which is amazing, actually. Now, the other two runes, Futures Market can help you get earlier buys, but that's kind of situational. It's not always going to be, you know, as consistently useful as the minion dematerializer, as well as Biscuit Delivery can be helpful in some really oppressive matchups. If you're having a lot of trouble with matchups that are poking you a lot, getting that biscuit at 3 minutes and some other biscuits throughout the laning phase can really help you stay in lane longer. But Vladimir really shouldn't be having that issue with how much sustain and untargetability he has in his kit. There really aren't many times where you would want to take the Biscuit Delivery, especially over the minion dematerializer, but it can work. On to row 3, there's really only one thing you see people take, and that's the Cosmic Insight. Cooldown reduction on everything is really powerful. Some more abilities for Vladimir, more flashes for Vladimir, and more item actives for Vladimir. This is hands down the best one, as well as the other two aren't. At least approach velocity isn't useful at all. There's not, the only way you can make this thing useful is building rallies, and that's devoting an entire item to get a rune to be somewhat useful, right? Time Warp Tonic is actually very good. Most Vladimirs start Dark Seal plus refillable potion, and the 5% movement speed you get is excellent. I would say this is a top tier rune, though not a lot of people run it because of how amazing the Cosmic Insight is. But if ever this rune gets nerfed, I mean, this is the next one in line. It's really quite good, I would say. 5% movement speed, again, how I was saying, with being able to force aggressive trades against enemy laners. It's going to be very, very useful. Okay, on to the third most useful tree, and these next two, Precision and Resolve, are mostly used as secondary trees because of the keystones being not so great. Resolve. Okay, so Guardian and Aftershock are garbage on Vladimir. There's not really a reliable way he can proc them and get an advantage out of them, so you would never want to take these keystones. Grasp of the Undying is, I guess, borderline. It can be used. It's just, again, same with Glacial Augment and Dark Harvest. Getting auto attacks in as Vladimir is really not that reliable. It's okay in the early laning phase, but throughout the game that becomes more and more useless. So Grasp is not really something you want to take. Now, Demolish is okay. It's, I guess, situational. It's a strong rune in itself, but it's not exactly something that Vladimir needs. As well as standing up next to Bone Plating, it's not something you take very much, right? It'll help you take towers, which is always powerful, but Bone Plating will be amazing no matter what throughout the game, give you more health for the laning phase and all that. Fawn of Life is pretty subpar as well, so... And next to the other two runes, you'd almost never want to take them. Now, Bone Plating is tier 1. It's top tier. You would always take Bone Plating if you take this tree because of just how much health it gives you throughout the laning phase. Every trade, you take less damage. This is a very excellent rune. So, row 2. Generally, the two options you have for row 2 is just Crystallis and Second Wind, and that's depending on... what kind of champion you're laning against. If you're against something that's going to consistently poke you to the point where you think maybe not even your Torrent Shield and stuff will be enough, you take Second Wind. But really, just like Bone Plating, Crystallis is just going to be way better overall. Extra 50 starting health is awesome, but also it will convert into ability power, which is Vladimir's most valuable stat throughout the game. So if you take this rune, or this tree secondary, mostly you just go Bone Plating and Crystallis and you don't think about anything else. But moving on to row 3, in case you are really intent on taking one of these keystones, then you have these. And the only really okay thing here is Revitalize, or Overgrowth, I suppose. They're both quite bad. Nothing in this row is very good, but it's normally Revitalize or Overgrowth would be the things you're looking for, just because of the healing Vladimir has in his kit, as well as all the health he gets. So, and on to the last tree, Precision. So Precision, again, same problem as Resolve. You don't really have a keystone that you can use very well, so it's kind of difficult to take this as a primary tree. The only keystone that you can actually use is Fleet Footwork. So all the other ones are garbage, but Fleet Footwork you can actually use on Vladimir, and there is some reason for you to want attack speed, at least for your starting stats, because it allows you to control the wave better, and maybe you're in a matchup where you can actually get a lot of auto attacks on the enemy champion, like in top lane against a melee champion. Fleet Footwork, again, with same problem with a lot of these other keystones. It applies on an auto attack, which is kind of awkward for Vladimir the later the game goes. But it's the only one that's actually worth considering here. And it's not, I mean, if you consider all the cost of taking the Precision where you get the secondary, you get attack speed for your runes and all that, you really don't want to go any of these keystones. It's mostly only about the secondary, as a secondary tree, and taking 2 of these. So row 1, the two things to really look at here are Overheal and Triumph. Overheal, a lot of people look at and say, well, Vladimir has a lot of healing, getting the extra shield will be really awesome. But most of the time, Vladimir is not at full health, and you're not going to overheal yourself. So it's not as useful as a rune as most people would think, because Vladimir actually has a health cost on his E, so you're like not going to be full health if you use E anyways. And in a lot of matchups, you're not going to be overhealing for much effect here. So Triumph is the superior choice in every case, because the extra healing in team fights when you're low health is often going to happen and save your life a lot of times. So Triumph is a top tier rune. The only disadvantage here is that you get the attack speed in your secondary. In the middle tree, Tenacity is the only real thing to look at. It's just the only useful stat for Vladimir. Attack speed is technically kind of useful for taking towers, as well as getting some nice early pressure, but it doesn't scale throughout the game like the Tenacity will, so you would take Tenacity here without thinking about anything else, really, if you were going in this tree. So in row 3, Coup de Grace is going to be the best rune. It applies on low health, low health targets, and that helps you kill the targets you're going for. Last Stand is the only other one worth considering, because Cut Down, you stack a bunch of health, so you're not really going to get much use of it, because most people are going to be less health than you anyways. Last Stand has some uses in that you get low in team fights and you can get the extra damage amp off Last Stand, but often it's not as consistent as the coup de grace, and Vladimir's not really a champion that looks to stay in fights when he's low health like some other champions, like Kled or Tryndamere can really use this rune to great effect. Okay, so that's it for the runes, and we'll go and see what some challenger players are taking for their rune pages. They're actually a very diverse set of runes that they look at right here. So these are all challenger players, and these are their runes they take. So you see some Airy, some Electrocute, Unsealed, Predator is often the most popular rune right now. So this is a Predator page, something like this, where this person took Ingenious Hunter to get more Predators, this person took Ravenous Hunter for some more sustain, and then Celerity versus Transcendence, the same kind of, do I need the early game pressure or do I not? Right, so this guy took, I need the early game pressure, with the Ravenous Hunter and the Celerity, right? So it gives him more sustain, as opposed to this guy went for a more scaling route with the CDR and the CDR here. Some other things. This is a very popular page right here run by Elite 500. Elite 500 is a challenger EU West Vladimir player who is known for being very cheesy 100-0 playstyle, where he stacks ability power and uses all the runes that give him extra ability power so that he can get one-shots on champions a lot earlier. And so you see he runs Electrocute. There's actually a person in Korean server who also uses a similar thing with the cheap shot. I was talking about you can use cheap shot to get a little extra damage there too. So all of these runes are quite useful, and these are all run in high challengers, so something to think about. Just kind of use the general tier list for how strong each runes are and try and construct a page you think will work for you and your matchup, and you should find success with your pages. Have a good one, guys.